There's a kind of quiet that settles into a house after 40 years, not emptiness, more like the walls have absorbed everything. The arguments, the laughter, the smell of Sunday roasts, the sound of small feet on hardwood floors. I know every creak in this house. I know which step on the staircase groans in the cold, which window lets in a draught in January, which corner of the kitchen catches the afternoon light just right. This house is not just where I live, it is who I am. So when my daughter sat across from me at my own kitchen table and slid a folder toward me with the same careful smile she uses when she's already decided something, I recognized the moment for what it was. Not a conversation, a transaction she'd already completed in her head. I was 67 years old. I had raised 2 children in this house, buried my husband from this house, and paid off the mortgage on this house 11 years ago with money I'd saved by working 41 years as a school librarian. I was not confused. I was not frail. I was not, as my daughter had recently begun suggesting to anyone who would listen, struggling to cope on my own. I just moved a little slower than I used to, and apparently that was enough. It had started small, the way these things always do. A year before that kitchen table moment, my daughter and her husband had driven up from Mississauga for Thanksgiving. It was a good visit. I'd made the turkey the way my mother taught me, with sage stuffing and cranberry from scratch, and we'd sat around this table for 3 hours just talking. My son-in-law had 2 helpings. My daughter seemed happy. But somewhere round the pumpkin pie she mentioned almost in passing that the house must be a lot to keep up with. I told her I managed just fine. She said she just worried was all. I said there was nothing to worry about. She dropped it, or so I thought. By Christmas, the comments had a different shape to them. Had I thought about downsizing? Did I know what houses in this neighborhood were going for these days? There was a lovely retirement community not far from them in Mississauga. Very active, lots of programs. She'd looked into it, just out of curiosity. I told her, as gently as I could, that I had no interest in moving to Mississauga, that my life was here. My church, my book club, my garden, my neighbors, my doctor of 20 years. Everything I knew was here. She smiled the way she always does when she thinks I'm being unreasonable, and said, "We just want what's best for you, Mum." I have learned at 67 that when someone says they want what's best for you, they often mean what's best for them. But I kept that thought to myself. The calls increased through the winter. My daughter called almost every other day, which would have been lovely except that every call circled back to the same subject, the house, my age, my isolation. The word isolation struck me as particularly rich, given that I had lunch with my neighbor Constance every Tuesday, volunteered at the public library on Thursday mornings, and had been attending the same book club for 16 years. Then in February, my son-in-law started calling too. He was never unkind exactly. He was what I would describe as aggressively reasonable. He had a way of presenting an argument like a PowerPoint slide, structured, calm, slightly condescending. He talked about property values and estate planning and the capital gains implications of selling versus holding. He used phrases like thinking strategically and your long-term best interests. I listened politely. I took notes, actually, which I don't think he expected. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time with my notepad in front of me. The late February light was thin through the window. The house was quiet around me in the way I love, not lonely, just peaceable. A robin had come back early to the yard. I could see it on the fence post. I thought about my husband who had died in this house 8 years ago, in the bedroom upstairs with the window that faces the maple tree. In his last weeks, he used to watch the birds from that window. He had particular opinions about blue jays. I still talk to him sometimes, which I realize sounds peculiar, but grief doesn't follow a schedule. I thought about what my daughter and son-in-law were really asking me to do, not just to move, but to hand over the last thing that was entirely mine. I decided, sitting there, that I would not be doing that. But I also understood for the first time that deciding was not enough. I needed to be ready. I called a lawyer the next morning, not someone I knew socially, a proper estate lawyer, recommended by Constance, whose late husband had been an accountant and who had navigated his affairs with what she described as no drama and full documentation. The lawyer's name was a woman about my age, efficient and warm, who asked good questions and explained things clearly. We spent 2 hours going over my will, my power of attorney documents, and what she called my capacity plan. A relatively new thing, she said, that she was recommending to all her clients over 60. Essentially, a written record of my wishes, my mental state, and my ability to make decisions, documented and witnessed, so that if anyone ever tried to challenge my competency, there was evidence, real evidence. I hadn't known such a thing existed. I left her office feeling, for the first time in months, like I was standing on solid ground. I also updated my will. I won't go into every detail, but I will say that the revisions reflected certain new understandings about my family that I had arrived at over the winter. I did not tell my daughter any of this. The folder arrived on a Thursday in April. Not through the mail, my daughter and son-in-law drove up and appeared at my door unannounced on a weekday morning. My son-in-law was carrying a leather portfolio, the kind business people carry to meetings. My daughter was dressed as though she'd come from work. I had been in the garden in my rubber boots. I came to the door and they both smiled, the way you smile at someone you've already made a decision about. "We were in the area," my daughter said. "We wanted to see you." No one drives to Guelph from Mississauga in the middle of a Thursday workday just to see someone. But I made tea, because that is what I do, and we sat in the kitchen. The folder came out after about 10 minutes. My son-in-law opened it on the table with the precise movements of a man who has rehearsed this. There were several documents inside. On top was something I recognized as a power of attorney, form, not the one I'd already signed with my lawyer, but a different one, a new one, with my name already typed on it. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," my daughter began, "and we really feel that it would give everyone peace of mind if there was a proper plan in place for your finances, just in case." I looked at the document. I looked at her. "Just in case of what?" I asked. My son-in-law stepped in, smooth as ever. He mentioned a family friend whose elderly parent had had a fall, the chaos that followed, how much better it would have been with the right structures in place. He used the word proactive 3 times in 2 minutes. "So this," I said, touching the edge of the paper without picking it up, "would give you authority over my finances." "It's just a safeguard," my daughter said. "A safeguard," I repeated. "You wouldn't even need to involve a lawyer," my son-in-law added. "It's pretty straightforward, standard form." I looked at him. He held my gaze and gave me a reassuring nod, the kind that is meant to communicate that the person nodding is trustworthy and that questions are not necessary. I picked up my mug. I took a sip of my tea. I set it back down carefully on the coaster. "I'd like to have my lawyer look at it first," I said. The air in the kitchen changed. It was subtle. No one raised their voice. No one made a scene. But I have raised 2 children and taught hundreds of others, and I know what the sudden stillness of a person recalculating looks like. My daughter said, "Mum, it's really not necessary." "I know it might not seem necessary to you," I said, but I would like my lawyer to look at it. That's what I'd like." My son-in-law said carefully, "It's a completely standard document. You don't need a lawyer for something like this." I nodded as though I was considering this. "That may be," I said, "but I'd still like to have her review it. I'll give her a call this week." My daughter looked at her husband. He looked at her. Some negotiation happened in that glance, and then she turned back to me with the smile I have come to think of as her management smile, the one that is meant to make me feel reassured and ever so slightly managed. "Of course," she said, "whatever makes you comfortable." They left an hour later. They took the folder with them. I called my lawyer that afternoon and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I appreciate about her. When I finished, there was a brief pause. "Do you still have the documents?" she asked. I didn't. They'd taken them, but I had taken photographs of every page with my phone while my son-in-law was in the bathroom. I told her this. Another pause. "Good," she said. "Send them to me." We met the following Tuesday. She had reviewed the documents by then, and she walked me through them carefully. The power of attorney they'd brought was broader than any safeguard requires. It covered not just medical decisions but full financial authority, with no independent oversight and no sunset clause. It would have given my son-in-law, specifically, the ability to manage my bank accounts, my investments, and my property, including the house. "Can they do this?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "They can prepare a document," she said. "They can't make you sign it, and they absolutely cannot tell you that you don't need legal advice before signing it. That's not true, and frankly, for a document of this scope, saying that to an elderly person is something a court would look at very seriously." I thought of my son-in-law's pleasant, certain face. "You don't need a lawyer for something like this." "What are my options?" I asked. She outlined them. I could do nothing and wait to see what they did next. I could document everything and keep my own lawyer involved from this point forward. Or, and this was her third suggestion offered carefully, I could invite them to a proper meeting, with her present, and make clear, formally, that I understood exactly what they had brought me and what I had declined. I chose the third option. I called my daughter that evening and told her that I thought it would be a good idea to sit down and talk everything through properly, that I had spoken with my lawyer and she was happy to join us, Friday afternoon, if they could manage it. There was a pause on the line. "Your lawyer," my daughter said. "Yes," I said. "I've asked her to be there. I want to make sure everything is above board and that we all understand each other." Another pause, longer this time. "Mum, this is a family matter," she said. "I don't know why you're making it." "I'm not making it anything," I said pleasantly. "I just want everything to be clear. You're welcome to bring anyone you'd like as well." They came on Friday, just the two of them. My lawyer was already at my kitchen table when they arrived, with her own files and a yellow legal pad, and I had made tea again because it is something I know how to do well, and I find it steadying. My lawyer introduced herself. My son-in-law's handshake when he shook her hand was slightly less confident than usual. We sat down. My lawyer began by saying that she represented my interests and was here to make sure that any arrangements involving my finances, my property, or my legal affairs were fully understood by all parties and documented appropriately. She said this in the same tone she might use to describe the weather. Then she looked at my son-in-law and asked calmly whether he would like to walk us through what he had brought the previous Thursday. He did, though the presentation was noticeably shorter than before. He described the documents as a routine precaution. My lawyer asked several specific questions about the scope of the authority, the oversight provisions, the mechanism for revoking consent. He answered some of them. For others, he said he would have to check. My lawyer made notes on her yellow legal pad and did not look up while he was speaking. There is something quietly powerful about a person who takes thorough notes while you're talking. Then she turned to me and asked whether I had any questions. Only one, I said. I looked at my son-in-law. Could you explain to me again why I don't need a lawyer for something like this? The kitchen was very quiet. He didn't answer. Not really. He said something about how he hadn't meant it the way it sounded. That of course I could involve whoever I wanted, that they were only trying to help. My daughter said nothing at all. My lawyer said mildly that she was glad we had all had this conversation and that going forward she would be reviewing any documents before I signed anything, and that she trusted this was not a problem for anyone. She said it as though it were a very small and obvious thing, which it was. They left before 4 o'clock. I stood at the door and watched their car back out of my driveway and turn down the street. My lawyer stayed for another cup of tea. She had grown up in a small town in New Brunswick and had a dry sense of humor that I had come to enjoy. We talked for a while about nothing in particular. The garden, a book she had recently read, the unseasonably warm April. Before she left, she told me that I had handled the whole thing very well. I made tea, I said. She laughed. You also knew to take pictures of those documents. I shrugged. My husband used to say that the best time to fix a fence is before it falls down. She gathered her files. At the door she paused and said, "Call me if anything else comes up, and I mean anything." I said I would. It is a strange thing to look at people you love and understand that love does not make them safe. My daughter was not a bad person. I believe that and still do. She had convinced herself, I think, that she was protecting me. That is how these things work. The people who take from you often genuinely believe they are helping. It makes them harder to argue with and easier to underestimate. I had made that mistake once. I did not intend to make it again. I had a long conversation with my daughter about 3 weeks after the meeting. Just the two of us on the phone, without my son-in-law. We talked for almost an hour. I told her honestly how the past months had made me feel, not angry, but diminished. Like my judgment wasn't being trusted. Like decisions about my life were being made in conversations I wasn't part of. I told her that I understood she was worried about me, and that I would rather she bring those worries directly to me than manage them around me. She cried a little. I let her. Then I told her that my affairs were in order, that I had a lawyer I trusted, that the house was mine and would remain mine, and that if she ever had concerns about my well-being, she could ask me directly, like a daughter, not prepare documentation. She said she was sorry. I believe she was. Whether that sorry extends to her husband, I'm less sure, but I'm not spending my evenings worrying about it. The April after all of this, I planted a new bed along the back fence. Sweet peas, which I have always loved but never had room for, and a climbing rose that my neighbour Constance took as a cutting from her own garden. It's a pale coral colour, very old variety, the kind her grandmother grew. Constance said it takes a season or two to get established before it really starts to climb, but once it does, it goes beautifully. I have time. The robin came back to the fence post again this year. I noticed it one morning when I was having my tea at the kitchen table in the spring light that comes through the window just right, and I thought, as I often do in that particular light, about my husband, about the fence he built along the back in 1989 that is still standing, about everything this house has held. I am 67 years old. I move a little slower than I used to. I take my time in the garden, and my time at the library, and my time at book club, and I have lunch with Constance on Tuesdays. My life is small in the best possible sense, full and specific and entirely my own. Nobody is signing anything they haven't read, not in this house. I still think about my son-in-law's face when he sat down at my kitchen table and saw my lawyer already there with her yellow legal pad and her files. Not angry, not shocked, just recalibrating. That small, quiet moment told me everything I needed to know about how the whole thing had been designed. It had been designed for a woman who wouldn't ask questions, and I had spent the better part of a year becoming someone who would. There's a version of this story where I sign those papers, where I tell myself my daughter knows best, that I'm too old to be managing these things alone, that conflict in a family is worse than compromise. I understand that version. I was close to it some days, but what I've come to understand is that every time we hand over our judgment because it feels easier, we don't just lose something practical. We lose a piece of the confidence that took a lifetime to build. And that kind of loss compounds quietly, like interest on a debt you didn't know you were carrying. What my daughter and her husband did came from somewhere I choose to believe was not entirely calculated, but intention doesn't change consequence. They presented me with documents that would have handed over my financial life, and they told me I didn't need legal advice to sign them. That is not a grey area. It doesn't matter how warmly it was said, or how reasonably it was packaged. The moment someone tells you that you don't need to protect yourself, that is precisely the moment you do. I think about the woman I was before I called my lawyer that February morning. Worried, yes, unsettled, but also uncertain whether I had the right to push back against my own child. That uncertainty is something I want to name plainly, because I think a lot of women my age carry it. We were raised in a time that asked us to keep the peace, to trust the people who said they loved us, to not make things difficult. Those instincts are not weaknesses, but they can be used against us, and we need to know that. What carried me through wasn't anger, it was something steadier than that. It was the decision, made quietly at my own kitchen table with a robin on the fence post, that my judgment was worth defending, that I was still the person best placed to make decisions about my own life, and then the discipline to act on that decision, to make the call, to take the photographs, to show up to my own story as a participant rather than a subject. Constance once said to me, after her husband died and she spent 2 years sorting out his affairs, that the kindest thing you can do for the people who love you is to keep your own house in order, not as a fortress against them, but so that love doesn't have to fill the gaps that preparation should have covered. I think that's right, and I think it applies to more than paperwork. My affairs are in order. The rose Constance gave me is climbing the back fence now, and nobody signs anything in this house without reading it first.